Hey everyone, welcome to another lecture of this JWT Authentication System where we are going to set up our database. So we are going to use MySQL DB for this. So we are going to set it up. Then we are going to create database migrations using a package known as Goose inside Golang. And then we are going to create models for our database. Alright, and at the last we are also going to set up a task file using which we can run commands in a breeze. So let's get started. So at first I want you guys to be aware of this package, which is this Go SQL driver MySQL package, which is a MySQL driver for Golang. Right, so we are going to use this MySQL driver package for all the database queries and for all the database interactions. So you see it has a very high number of stars. So what I want you to do is first copy this installation command and come to your code base. So this is our code base, and you just paste this command and just enter. And if you do that, you will see that in your go.mod, this package will be installed. So by that, you just install this package. Now, what I want you to do is that just open your MySQL workbench. So you can open your MySQL workbench, or in my case, what I am using is I am using this data grep. So it is another tool by JetBrains IDE using which I can interact with databases in a very efficient manner. So you can do the same in MySQL Workbench, but I am going to use this data grep. So if I execute this show databases command, I am going to see that these are all my databases, right? So I want you to now first create a database by running this command. Right, so create database and just enter whatever the name of the database that you want it to be, and what it will do is it will create a new database. And then I just ran this command using which I am using this databases, so that every command or query that I run will run inside this particular database that I have created. Now if you execute this query, which is show tables, so you will be able to see that this is pretty empty, because inside this YT JWT Auth Golang database that I have created, we have not created any tables, right? That is why you do not get to see anything over here. So with that, what you did is that you simply created a database for you, which we are going to use in this project. Now, how to set up everything? So for setting up everything, we are going to look at a config. So see, this is the same package, this MySQL driver package, and inside here we have a config which looks something like this. So this is a config struct which has a username, a password. So what is this? Like, this is the config for the MySQL that we are going to use in our Golang project, right? So you see inside this config struct we have this username, we have this password, this network address, DB name, params, and a bunch of stuff, right? So we are going to create a config for this MySQL or for this database, and then we are going to use this throughout our application. Now, so see, previously in our .env, you will be able to see that we just had these things for our server config. Similarly, we also want to have this dbconfig environment variables. And what are they? They are basically this stuff only, like this username, password, this network, address, database name. So just come to your .env and just create these environment variables. So here you need this username and password. So that username and password you can verify, and you can get the credentials from your MySQL workbench. So in my case, that is nothing but root and root. So root is my username and root is my password. Then we will have this thing which is this net, which basically represents the network. So it can be TCP, TCP6, Unix, anything. So I am going to mention here as my TCP, and then we are going to have this address, which is by default this thing, right, for TCP. So that is what we are going to have. So a database address, and the value is this, which is same as this, right? So this is where the database will basically run on our local machine, and this is explicitly for this TCP network. And then you will have this db name variable. So just create this db name variable, and in my case I have created a database by this name. So that is what I will entry as the field. So this is everything related to our db config. Now what you have to do is that you will have this dbconfig file, and inside this dbconfig file what we will have is we will have a struct just like this server config, but now it will be a dbconfig struct, right? So just create this struct. So it will be a struct by the name of dbconfig, and inside it the parameters we are going to have is these ones. So the db username, db password, db net, db address, and db name. So I'm just going to do a bit of copy pasting. So yeah, you see these are the properties. Now similarly like our server config, we will also have a function which will load this dbconfig from our .env, right? So for it, just create a function by the name of load dbconfig, and it will take no parameters, and what it will return is a pointer to this dbconfig struct and an error, right? So just like your server config, you see it accepted nothing and it returned a pointer to this server config and an error. Similarly, we have this signature. So this thing, which is your loading env, will be same as in your dbconfig also. So you can just copy paste it, and once that's done, you have to load the environment variables and create the dbconfig. So just create a new variable by the name of config or anything, and then it is going to be a pointer variable, and the value of these properties will again come from your .env using this function that we have created, this load single env variable. So the process is same like in our server config. So just go ahead and type out the load single env variable, and here the name will be db username, and then the default value can be root, and the same goes for your password, but the only change is that it will be this key for your password. Then the same you will have for your net, address, and db name. So for your net, you will have this dbnet property. So just copy paste this, and you can have the default value as TCP over here. That won't be a problem at all. And then you will have a db address. So this will be the key, and the value can again be this default value. So you can just copy paste it, and then you will have a db name by this key, and its default value can be anything. So you can have basically a auth db. So once that is done, you'll just go ahead and return this config, and for error you will just return nil. So this is the dbconfig layer. Once that is done, you will have to create another function. So we are going to create another function which will be basically helpful for setting up our MySQL DB. So I named it as setupdb, and it is going to take some parameters, which is number one, your dbconfig, which is this one. So it is going to accept a struct, a pointer to this struct, and then it is going to take a logger of type zap.logger, right? So it is going to accept your logger, and in return what it will return is two things: the sql.db, which is coming from your SQL. So you see this database SQL, and you are going to return your error. Alright, now if you come to your MySQL config, then you'll be able to see that you have this new config function which will return a config. So it will create a new config and it will set the default values. So what we will do is we will use this function to create a new config, and then we will set all the properties of this config coming from our env. So let's do that. So at first what you will do is you will create a dummy config of MySQL. So for that you just do a MySQL dot new config, and it will return you a new config. And this config, whatever its default values are there, so like these ones, you will just set their properties to the properties coming from your this db config, right, which is a type of struct, which is this one. So pretty simple. You will just do config dot user, and it will be your db config dot username. Similarly, you will have your password, which is denoted by this pass wd, and then you will have your net address and your db name. So net address and your db name, right? So for user you will have this username. For password it will be a db password. For net it will be a db net, and for address it will be a db address, and then for db name it will be db name. So once you created this MySQL config, so the first step was to create a MySQL config. Once you did this, in the next step you have to open a MySQL database connection, and for doing that you will see that there is another function, this open function, which will take the driver name and it will take this DSN string. So what you can do is you can just give a comment of that you are opening a new DB connection, and what you will do is you will just type SQL.open. So you see it is taking two parameters. One is your driver name, another is your DSN or your data source name. So for your driver name it will be your MySQL, and for your DSN it will be basically the config. So whatever config that you had over here, you will just type config and you will invoke the format DSN, which will return a string, right? So that is what you will pass to this SQL.open function, and this will give you two things. One is your star of db thing and your error. So you just store them in your variables. So you just create these two variables, which is a db and error, and then if you check that if your error is not null, then it means that you have an error over here. So first you have to log the error out, and second you have to return out from this function. So let's first return out. So you just do return nil comma error. So this star sql.db or this pointer will be basically null, and for this error you're returning this error. And how to log it? So if you go to your zap loggers, so over here you can see that we have an access to this zap logger. So to use this you have to write out this thing, which is this one. So you just do logger.info or error or anything, and then you can just type out your error or your text, and then you can just give a comma, and then you can just go on concatenating these things, right? So that is what we are going to do. So I'm going to type the as logger.error or logger.fatal, and then the message or the text I will give as something went wrong while opening this DB connection, and then I will concat this error message. So for that I will just type zap.string, and I should use the string, and for the key I will use the error, and for the value I will use as the error.error. So this will help to log out this error also. And once that is done, you have to ping your database. So for pinging, let me write a comment first. So for pinging, what you can do is you can again come to your package, this Go package, and you can just search for ping, and I don't see it being mentioned here explicitly, but basically how you can ping is you can just type your db. So this db variable, it will have a ping function, and it will again return an error. So you can again store it into your error variable. And what is it saying? Alright, so we already used this error previously, so you just give an equal to, and so you got this error. Then you again check if your error is not equals null, and if it's not null, then it means that we have an error. So you just copy this stuff and you can again paste this, and you are going to return this error and nil as your db config. And then inside your log you can type as something went wrong while pinging the database, right? So that makes much more sense, and you can just concat this error out. And once that is done, you can simply write another log, but it will be an info log, because see, these were the error logs, so you had to use either fatal or error. But once that is done, then that means that we have a successful db over here, right? So that is why it is a successfully connected to db. So that is what we are going to log out. So, and I also want to concat the db name, so I will just concat it by doing this db underscore name. And what is the db name? It will come from your db config dot your db name, right? So you see, we logged this success message also, and at the last what you will return is, you will return this db and you will return this nil, because you don't have any error. So this is our db config layer. Now you see, if I come to my data grep, then you will be able to see that we don't have any tables, right? So now what we actually want is we want to create all the tables, and for that we want migrations. So for migrations we are going to use a package which is known as the Goose package. Yeah, so this is my Goose package, and this is what we will use for all our database migrations. So at first you just go to your getting started, installing Goose, and you can just install, or you can just copy this command and you can just paste it out. So come to your terminal. Yeah, this is my terminal. I will just paste it out, and it will basically install Goose for you, which you can use for your database migrations. So I already have this Goose package installed, so I will just cancel this out. Now if you come back to this Goose docs, you will be able to see that you can use Goose like this. So at first what you have to do is that this is how you can call the Goose commands. So for using Goose, whatever commands that you write, you always have to mention two things: this driver and this db string. So that is a bit hassle, because every time you go and you run any Goose command, you have to explicitly mention this driver and db string. So a common workaround this is that we can define our Goose driver and this Goose db string into our env variables, right? So for doing that, just come back to your .env file. So this is the .env file that we have created previously, and over here just add these three variables, which will help this Goose to let us know that this is the database that we are actually trying to integrate it with, right? So this Goose db string has a format, so which you have to specify in this. So at first you will have this username, then colon and your password, which is this, @ of this network, which is this TCP, and then in this brackets you have to define your address, which is the same as this, and then slash and your database name, which is in my case this one. And once you got this, so you have to define your Goose driver, which is your MySQL, then your Goose db string, and then this Goose migration directory you have to define, which will basically tell that where all of these migrations will be basically stored. So that is our inside this internal, and inside this database folder you will see that we have created this migrations folder, right? So we want all the Goose migrations to go over there. So that is why we define this Goose migration directory as this path, which is internal /database/migrations. Alright, so that is basically it. Now if you run this command, which is Goose status, you will be able to see that currently you don't have any migrations. So if I show you the Goose commands, you can see that we have this Goose up by 1, up to, down to, and all of these commands which will help us to work with this Goose package. So I just ran this Goose status command to see what is the migration status for my current DB, and you see we do not have any migrations file yet. So what I want is, if you remember in the previous lecture, we discussed that this is the DB schema design that we are going to follow. So for this, what I will do is I will create individual migrations file which will help us to create these tables. And before that, another thing that I am going to do is that I want you guys to learn about this Taskfile. And what this Taskfile will basically do is that you see we have all these commands inside Goose. So we have all these commands. So inside this Taskfile, we will create a simple list where we will mention all our commands alongside with a description. So in order to use it, you just click on this get started, and so you see you have to first install it. You can install it using npm also, and that is what I actually did. So go ahead and just install this Taskfile, and once that is done, come to getting started and just copy this command and paste it over here. So this will create a taskfile.yml files, right? So it will be a YAML file, and inside this we can define all our tasks using this sort of format. So I will just remove this command and I will create some tasks which we will use throughout this entire backend project. So I am leaving this as default so that you can, refer to as a task. So the first task that I will create is this Goose status, whose description will be to print the status of all our migrations. So print the status of all DB migrations. And what is the command that it will run? It is basically the Goose status. So this command, this Goose status is the command that it will run. Alright, next I want to create a task whose command will be to create a new migration. So if you come over here, you will be able to see that you have this a Goose create, which will create a new migration. So its format is, if you see, if I search over here like create Goose migration, you will be able to see that you have to write sort of this command. So you just type the Goose create and then you give a name to this migration, and then you specify the dialect, which is SQL. So in a similar fashion, I will create this task whose name will be Goose create, whose description will be to create a new SQL migration or DB migration. And it will require a variable which is this migration name, right? So it will require this migration name as the input variable, and the command that it will run is the Goose create command. So Goose create, and in order to use this variable inside the command, you can follow this sort of approach. So that is what we are going to follow. And next we have to specify the dialect, which is SQL. Alright, so that is how we created another task which will help us to create a new database migration. Next, I am going to create another task which will run this command, which is Goose up, and it will basically migrate our database to the most recent version available. So whatever migrations that we have, it will apply all the migrations. So that is what I am going to create. So it will be Goose up -all, and then its description will be to apply all DB migrations, and the commands that it is going to run is the goose up command. Next, I want to have another task which will help us to migrate our database to a specific version, and its format is again something like this, wherein it will accept a variable which is the version, and it will basically apply this command, this up to command, and here we will specify our version. So in order to do that, I will just copy paste this thing, and it will be known as goose up to, because you see we are going to migrate our database to a particular version. So that is why this goes up to, and its description is to migrate our database to a specific version. So migrate database to a specific version, and it will require a variable which is your version, and then you will basically run this goose up to command, wherein you will also mention this version variable. Next, I will have another task which will basically run this command, which will migrate our database by the next migration, which means that it will apply the next migration which is there. So yeah, let's just create a command for this. So I will just copy this task and I will just paste it out, and it will be goes up by 1, and what it will do is it will just migrate up a single migration from the current version. So it will basically apply all the changes that we have in the next migration. So it will apply all the changes made in the next migration. So that is what this thing will do, and the command that we are going to use is goose up by 1. Alright, so this is the task that we have created. Now similarly, just like how we have this up all, up to, and up by 1, we will have the same for our down also. So if you see, you have this down which will help roll back the version by just one single version. Then you have this down to which will roll back to a specific version. So let's first create these two tasks. So I will just copy paste my up by 1 and my up to task, and I will name it as down to, and it will basically roll back my migration to a specific version. And again, it requires your version variable, and the command that we are going to use is goose down -2 and then the version itself. And we are going to have this down by 1 command which will roll back a single migration. So it will roll back a single migration from the current version. And its command will be goose down. And once that is done, we also want to roll back all migrations. So for that, what you can do is you can just run this command. So you'll just run goose down to, and you can just specify 0 as the version. So let me create that. So it is goose down all, which will roll back all the migrations. And the command that it will run is goose down to, and the version specified as 0. Alright, so these are all the tasks that we have, and in order to see all this task in your terminal, you can just type task -l, maybe it's -l, let's see. Yeah, so you see, these are all the tasks available for this particular project. And how can you run a particular task? We'll just type out this task and just specify this name. So at first we have this default, so I'll just copy paste this default task name, and you see it just echoed this hello world, which is exactly what we have in our default task. Similarly, if I want to see my goose status, so I'll just type task and then goose and then status. So you see, it just ran this goose status command, which failed actually because there are no migration files found. Alright, so that is how we can use this task file for our purpose. Alright, so with that in mind, let us create all the migrations and create all these DB columns. Alright, so come to your code base, and at this point of time you can push whatever changes that you have made. So I will just type out this git status command, and you see I created this new task file. So I will just push it to GitHub, and the commit message I will give as create task file. And I will just push it out. And if you remember that we are in this feed project setup branch, and if I again write this git status command, I will be able to see that we do not have anything to commit. Alright, so that makes a lot of sense. Now let's go and create all these migrations one by one. So for that, what we are going to do is that I am going to come here, and if you remember in our .env we are using this database, right? And in my data grep also I opened I am using this database, and I just wrote this command, which is show tables, and we will be able to see that we do not have any tables over here, right? So let's go ahead and create one by one. So at first what I want is I want to create this users table, and for doing that what I will do is I will create a new migration for it. So if I again do this task -l, so I have all this task, and what I will do is I will just execute this task, which is task goose create, and if I run this, you will be able to see that it requires this migration name variable. So in order to specify that, you can do something like this. So you just specify your migration name and then hyphen, and then you have to give it a name. So I will first create my users table, which is over here, this one, and for doing that I will give my migration name as add users table. So guys, actually while reviewing this task file, I have noticed that I have created this mistake where this commands will be outside, right? So like now what I did is inside my requires I mentioned this commands, right? So basically it will be outside this requires, so it will be at the same level as my requires. So this is the mistake that I did, and the same over here and the same over here, right? So this was a mistake that I did, and yeah, so with that fixed, let us first create this users table, and for that I am going to create a new migration. And if you see, I'm again doing this task -l, then these are all the tasks that we have, and I am going to run this goose status task, which is currently empty because we do not have any migration files yet. So I will first create this goose migration, which is add users table, and not like this, yeah, like this. So task goose create, and this goose create, if you remember, it is accepting this migration -name variable. So that is what we are mentioning over here, and then we give equal to and then add users table. So you can give it like create users table or anything, but I'm just putting it like this. And if you run it, you will be able to see that inside your migrations, you have this add users table migration created. Now, inside this, you will see that there are two parts, this goose up part and this goose down part. Now, here you will write all your migrations or all the changes which you want to apply in your database. And in your down, basically you will write all the commands which will revoke these changes. So whatever changes you make, so let's say that in your goose up, you create a table of this users. So it is your responsibility that in this down section, you mention the reverse of it, which is basically this dropping this table, right? So you can tell it is a reverse of this, or simply whatever changes or migrations you have over here, these things have to revoke them out. So this is where goose up and goose down commands really come in handy. So if you remember, inside this users table, we are going to have this ID, username, email, password, is verified, created at, and updated at, right? So let's go ahead and write this SQL command out. So it is basically create table if not exist. So create table if not exist, and the table name is users, and inside this the columns are going to be ID, which is an integer, and which will be basically an auto increment, and it is going to be the primary key for this particular table. And then we will have this username, which will be a varchar of, let's say, 255 max length, and it is going to be not null, right? And then we are going to have this email, which is the same as this. So again, it is going to be a varchar of 255 length, and it is going to be not null. And with that done, we are going to have another password column also, which will be the same as this. So this password column, which is again a varchar of 255, and which is again not null. And once that is done, we have to add this is verified boolean, right? So for adding it, we are going to write the is verified as the column name, which is going to be a boolean, which is going to be a not null, and whose default value is going to be false. And at the last, we are going to mention the timestamps, which is the created at, which will be a type of timestamp, and whose default value will be a current timestamp. And then you will also have this updated at column, which is going to be a timestamp, and whose default value is again this current timestamp. And on update, like whenever this user resource will get updated, then you will update this updated at column, and you will make it as the current timestamp. So I believe they are all going to be the columns inside our users table. So you see, we are going to have ID, username, email, password, is verified, and created at and updated at. So ID, username, email, password, is verified, created at, and updated at. And once that is done, in our drop column, what I will do is I will specify this drop table if exists, and my users is the table name. So this is the Goose migration that I have created. So if I again do your task of Goose status, you will be able to see that we have this add users table migration, which is currently pending. Alright, so what I will do is I will first create all the migrations, and then I will use this command, which is this goose up, which will apply all our data migrations. So it's like telling that we are going to create all these tables simultaneously. So this was it for our users table. Now let's go ahead and create a new migration for our roles table. So again, just type out the goose create command, and the migration name will be add roles table. So you see, we have another file created. So here I am going to create my roles table. So create table if not exists of roles, and the columns it is going to have are ID, name, description, created at, and updated at. So just specify them over here. So it is an ID, integer, primary key, and auto increment. And then we have this name column, which is a varchar of 255, which is going to be a unique, and which is going to be a not null. And by this I also remembered that in our users table, I want my username and my email to be unique. So I don't want multiple users bearing the same username and email. So I will just go here and I will specify here as unique. And the same goes for my email as well. And once that is done, I will come back to my roles migration, and then I will add my description column, which is going to be a text, and it is going to be not null. And then for the timestamps, I will just copy paste it over here. Yeah, so this was the up command basically, and for dropping it, it will be drop table if exists, and then this roles table. So with that done, we also added this migration for our roles table. Next, let's create this table, which is a join table, joining our user table and our role table. So for doing that, again run this task goose create command, and its migration name will be add user underscore roles table, and it will create a new migration for us. And inside this, I will create my new table if it not exists, and its name will be user underscore roles. And inside it, I am going to have at first I will have my ID. So my ID will be an integer, a primary key, and then auto increment. And then it is going to have this user ID coming from my users table and a role ID coming from my roles table. So it will have my user ID, which is going to be an int of not null. Similarly, I'm going to have my role ID, which is int not null. And then I will have my timestamps similarly over here also. And at last, I will create this relationship with my individual tables. So I'll just type the foreign key, which is my user ID, and which references my users table. And particularly inside this users table, it is going to reference my ID column. And on delete, I want it to be cascade. So that means that if I have user roles allotted to a specific user, then if that user is somehow deleted sometime, then this user roles will also get deleted. And similarly, I will have my role ID column reference the ID column of my roles table. And again, it is going to be on delete cascade, so that if this role gets deleted in the future, then all the user roles that use this particular role will also get deleted. So that's how it works, and this is our up migration. And for the drop, I will have my drop table if exists. So in the down command, I will just drop this table if it exists. So once that is done, let us go ahead and create this sessions table whose columns are going to be ID, user ID, a refresh token hash, and is revoked, and created at and updated at. And this user ID is again going to point towards my ID of my users table. Alright, so let me create another migration by this command, which is task goose create, and the migration name over here will be add sessions table, and it created this migration file. So just come inside it, and for the up, I will just write out my create table if it not exists, and the table name is going to be sessions. And inside this, the properties I am going to have are my ID, which is an integer of primary key and auto increment, then user ID, which is going to be an int and basically not null, and then I will have my is revoked boolean. So you see, this is revoked boolean, which is going to be again a not null and having a default value as false. And then I will have my refresh token hash, which is going to be a text of not null. So it can be a lot bigger. So that is why we are using text over here. And at last, we are going to have our timestamps, which are our created at and updated at. And at last, I also have to establish this relationship right between this user ID and the ID column of my users table. So for that, I will just type out this foreign key, and the column name is this user underscore ID, which references my users table, and inside this the ID column, and it is going to be an on delete of cascade. And with that done, in my down command, I will execute this drop table if exists, and then this is the table name. Fine. And at last, I am going to create another migration for this OTP table. Alright, so how to do it? Again, it is the same repetitive process. So come back to your code base, and create this new migration file, which is add OTPs table, and that will create a new migration file for me. And here in the up script I will create my OTP table. So it is going to be a create table if it not exists, and the table's name is going to be OTPs. Then inside it I'm going to have my ID, which is integer of primary key of auto increment, and then a user ID, which is an int of not null, and then a user email. So if you come back to your users table, you see that your email is defined as varchar unique not null. So the same we are going to copy and come over here, and then I am going to paste it over here. But this I don't want as unique, because we can send multiple OTPs to the same user. So it doesn't make much sense if my user email column is unique inside this particular OTP table. So this is what we have, and then I'm going to have this OTP column. So it is going to be an OTP. This is going to be a varchar of max 10 characters, let's say, and which is going to be not null. And once that is done, I am going to have my timestamps as well. So just copy paste them out. And here I'm going to establish my relationship between this user ID column and the ID column of my users table. So for doing that, you will just have this foreign key of this user ID, which is going to reference the users table, and inside it the ID column, and then it is going to have an on delete of cascade. Right, so that if this user gets deleted, then all the OTPs associated with this particular user also gets deleted. And for my down script, I will have drop table if exists, and then this table name. So I believe we have all the migrations set. So we have a total 5 tables, and we created 5 individual migrations for all these 5 tables. Now if you again do task Goose status, you're going to see that all these migrations are pending, which means if you come to your data grep or MySQL workbench and you still do this show tables command, you are going to see that you will have one table, which is this Goose DB version, but there are no other tables like users, sessions, OTPs. So for doing that, you remember you created this particular task, which is Goose up all, which will apply all the database migration. So just execute this task Goose up all command, and it will apply all this migration. Now if you again do task Goose status, you are going to see that at first you have all these migrations which were pending, but now you see they are all applied, right? And if you come to your data grep and now you do something like show tables again, you are going to see that you will have all these tables. You will have your users table, your roles table, your user roles table, the sessions table, and the OTPs table. So that is the beauty of our Goose migration. And up till here I'm going to push everything to my GitHub. So just git status, and then git add all, then git commit with the message of create the required database migrations, and just push them out. So that is done. So let's see, where are we on the agenda of this video? So you see, we set it up our database, we set it up this task file, and we also set up our database migrations. Now we have to create individual models. So if you see inside your database folder, you have this models folder as well. And inside this models, we are going to actually go and declare Golang structs for each one of these tables. So the models that we are going to have is the user model, the role model, the user role model, the session model, and the OTP model. Now let's create this Golang structs for each one of our tables. So if you open your migration and you see your users table, so this is how our user table actually looks like, right? So let's create this Golang struct for our user model. So it is going to be type of struct. It is going to be my user model. And inside this, the properties that I am going to have are my ID, which is an integer. And inside my DB, it is going to be known as the ID. And in my JSON, like whatever JSON that I will have, I will also have its name as ID. Then this username, so the username will be used like this. So it is going to be a string, and inside my DB it is going to be represented by this username. And then in my JSON it will again be same as username, and in my validation tags I am going to have a validation of required. So validate required. So this validate required will basically make this username a required property of my user model struct. And similarly, I am going to copy paste it for my rest of my columns. So after username, we have this email, so which is going to be my email, and inside my DB it is going to be known as email, and in the JSON as well. And then I will have my password, and in my DB and my JSON it is going to be known as password itself. And then I am going to have my is verified, which is going to be a boolean. So it is going to be is verified, which is going to be a boolean. And inside the database it will be known as a DB of is verified, and in my JSON it is again going to be known as your is verified. And I don't want any required tags on this one, because you see in the DB itself we declared that its default value is going to be false, right? So it is not required at all, right? So this can be an optional field as well. So I just removed my tag, and then we are going to have this created at and this updated at properties. So for doing that, I'll just type this created at, and here I'm going to use it as a string, and its DB name and the JSON name will be created at and created at. Alright, so that's it for this one, and similarly we are going to do the same for my updated at. And one thing to keep in mind is that we only have required declared on these three fields. Why we do not have it on my user ID? Because that is something that we will get only after creation of that resource, right? So until and unless we do not create our user, we are not going to have this ID column, right? Hence it is going to be an optional. It can and it cannot have an ID column. And the same concept applies for the created at and updated at as well. We only will get this created at and updated at once the resource has been created. Hence, we do not have required fields defined for these properties or for these particular columns, right? So that is our user model defined. Now you can just copy it out and you can just go to your role model and just open the role migration, and you can just copy paste it. Obviously there are going to be some things which we are going to change, and which is number one, the name, which is the role model, and here we are going to again have this ID, and here I'm going to have a name, so it is going to be a string and it is going to be this name in my JSON and in my DB both, and then I will have my description. So just copy paste it out, and again it is required, and then I'm going to have my created at and updated timestamps. So just remove these two out. So this is the final struct. So it is going to have this ID, which is an int, and inside your DB and JSON it is going to be known as ID, and your name, which is going to be a string, and the description as well, and then you are going to have your timestamps as usual. So that is the role model for us. Now open your user role model and open the user role migration that you just created, and again I'm going to copy paste this thing out, and the changes that you have to make over here are number one, its name, and over here you are also going to need this user ID and this role ID columns, right? So just paste this ID column twice, and at first you will have your user ID. So it is going to be user ID, which is going to be an int, and inside your DB and JSON, it will be known as user underscore ID. Same goes for your role ID. So it is going to be this role ID, which is again going to be an integer, and inside your DB and JSON, it's going to be known as role underscore ID. And once that is done, you will have your created at and updated at timestamps. So this is the final user role model struct that you are going to have. Another thing that you must notice over here is that you cannot create this entity until and unless you are going to have this user ID and role ID, which means that this user ID and role ID are going to be a required field, right? So just go ahead and add this validation tag in your user ID and role ID as well. And that pretty much makes a lot of sense. And then let's code the session model. I will just copy paste my role model or my user role model, for instance. And inside my session model, I will have my number one, I will have my ID. Let's first open my session table as well, this migration file. So I have this ID property, then I have this user ID, then I will have my is revoked. So I am going to have a is revoked, which is going to be a boolean by the name of this is revoked, and it is not going to be a required field, so I can remove it out. And then I am going to have this refresh token hash, which is a required field, and inside your DB it will be known as this refresh token hash, and it will be a required field. So just mention this required over here, and let me fix the name of this. So it is refresh token hash. That makes a lot of sense, and I want this over this. So now it makes a lot of sense for our session model as well, right? So for the session model, this user ID and this refresh token hash are required fields, hence we put required over there, and on all others we do not have that. And at last, let's have this OTP model. So how it is going to look is type of my OTP model. It is going to have my user ID, my user email, and OTP as well. So at first, my user ID, which is going to be user ID, and it is going to be a required field, and then this user email. So just go ahead and create this particular property, and please note that this user email is also going to be a required field. Alright, and then I will have my OTP. So here is my OTP, which is a string, and which is going to be known as OTP in my DB and OTP in my JSON, and it is going to be a required field. So this is the finalized OTP model. So please note that my user ID, my user email, and my OTP are required fields, right? So with that done, I hope that all these 5 models that we have created are somewhat clear to you guys. So let's first take a pause and first push them to our GitHub. So I'm just adding them, and then I will commit them, and I will give it a message of create all the required models or all the required DB models, right? And then just push them out. So with that done, we have also created these models, right? So the agenda of this video has been completed. Now just come to your GitHub repo once, and you can see that these are the comments that we have made, right? So that's it for this lecture, guys. In the next lecture, we are actually going to create an end-to-end endpoint using all of these layers that we have created, and that will give you a sense of how we can actually write production-based endpoints, right? So that's it for this lecture, guys. Take a break and keep coding hard, and I will meet you in the next lecture.
Let me tell you about that VE. I'ma be your recruit and